We use certificates all over the place whenever we're dealing with asymmetric encryption situations. Now, I'm assuming a lot of us have probably seen certificates, but if you haven't, let me show you one place where you can see certificates pretty much anytime you want, and that's in your web browser. So in order to do this, open up a web browser and pick pretty much any arbitrary website, a public one, and that'll be automatically secured. And let's take a look at something. So here we are. If you look way up the top here, zoom in right here. Do you see that little lock? That shows us that we are on a secure connection. All web pages are today. You see the HTTPS, of course. But if you want to just see the certificate, all you got to do is click here, and we can actually view the certificate. Windows does a nice job of having a certificate viewer, just like you have Microsoft Word to view Microsoft Word documents. Then you have a built-in certificate viewer, which is part of Windows. So you take a look here, we can get some basic information, who's it's issued to, who's it issued by, valid dates. But here's the important thing, right here at the very top. You see this? This certificate is intended for the following purposes. Identity to a remote computer ensures the identity, and then some special little hidden numbers, which are just going to be for Windows, and we're not going to worry about those. But the important thing you see right here is that it literally tells us what the certificate is for. That's because there's lots of different certificates. Now be real careful here. When people start talking about different certificates, they have some vision that there's all these different types of certificate formats. They're not. All certificates are based on X.509 standard, and literally there's just one line in the certificate, or a few lines usually, that define what this certificate is for. If it's for a web page, it's probably going to have somewhere in that certificate www.whatever the web page I'm worried about.com is. If it's going to be worried about email, it's going to have somewhere in that certificate, there's going to be the email address associated with it. Get the idea? So let's go through and take a look at some of the different types of certificates you can run into. But let's start with web certificates because, let's face it, it was the World Wide Web that started the motivation for certificates because people wanted to buy stuff at eBay. And as a result, the most sophisticated certificates tend to be for the web. So let's take a look at this. And what we're going to do is we're going to head over to a site called Comodo that actually issues certificates for us. You pay the money, and then they will give you certificates. So let's take a look. So this is Comodo right here. And if you take a look here under SSL certificates, you can see they sell a lot of different certificates. So the most basic one they sell is called the Comodo SSL certificate. What that is known as a domain validation certificate. Domain validation certificates are the most basic certificate there are. Basically what you do is you tell them, I need a certificate for www.mywebsite.com, and it will generate a certificate. These are usually done people who give away free certificates. Checking out things like Let's Encrypt is a wonderful place for free certificates, but it's only good for one domain. In fact, you got to be careful when you say one domain, because when I say domain to a lot of people, they'll think like, well, IBM.com is a domain. Well, it is. But what we're really talking about is a very specific system on that domain. You can only have a domain validation for www.ibm.com, for example. Okay, let's take a look, but there's more. So the next one over here you'll see is called a wildcard SSL certificate. These are there, but they're a little bit risky. I don't know about you, but I've been to plenty of websites that have names that don't start with www. I've seen them where they start with hub or system.com, whatever it might be. We start web pages with www just as a convenience. There's no law of physics that requires that. Or you can have www.houston.totalsem.com and www.dallas.totalsem.com. So it's complicated, but you can have much more detailed domain names. And in that case, a lot of people will want to use a wildcard. A wildcard basically says, I will take asterisk.totalsem.com. So www.totalsem.com and system.totalsem.com and fileserver1.totalsem.com. All of these can be served by a single certificate. And that makes our lives a little bit easier. The downside to using wildcard certificates is that bad guys can, if they break in, they could make a evilsystem.totalsem.com. So we tend to avoid wildcards except in places where we have a little bit more confidence about the security. But that's not it. Let's take a look and see what else is here. So the next one I want to talk about is extended validation, SSL, or what we just say is EVs for us hip kids. With an extended validation, it really goes through a lot more work to make sure that www.totalsim.com is who it is. With an EV, you're probably going to have somebody look up your Dun & Bradstreet numbers. You may get a phone call. You'll have somebody actually query the website, verify that there's no malware on it and stuff like that. EV certificates are more expensive than DV certificates because they put a little bit more work into it. But on top of that, people like Comodo will give you much better guarantees and warranties. And literally, companies like Comodo will say, if anybody hacks your certificate, we will pay you up to $1 million or something like that. With extended validation, it's like 1.8. Do not hold me to these numbers, just use them as a relative gauge. It's 1.8 worth of protection versus like 750,000 for a regular domain validation. EVs are more expensive, but as a result, if I see an EV certificate, I'm going to be more comfortable. When I click on that little lock and I see it's an EV, what do you mean you don't look? I look. It's going to give me more confidence. Places like Google, places like Amazon, places like eBay tend to use EV certificates exclusively, mainly because it gives people more confidence to put in their credit cards. Now, there is one more type of web certificate that you're going to see on the exam, and that's called Subject Alternative Name, or SAN certificate. It's still just a web certificate, but the only difference there is that a subject alternative name, it's kind of like a wildcard but more limited. Whereas a wildcard is *.totalsim.com, I can pick and I can say, no. I want www.totalsim.com. I want I got to make things up because you people are going to check me. Feldspar.totalsim.com. This is a great server.totalsim.com, but only those three things. Whereas a wildcard takes anything. Subject alternative names you can enumerate specifically, including things like email. Now you'd say, well, Mike, why would a web server want an email address associated with it? Because maybe I want people to be able to contact me through what's known as WHOIS information. There's a lot of good reasons where subject alternative name certificates are extremely popular. Okay, that's the web. And there's actually more types of certificates than that, but these are the ones that are listed on the Security Plus. But there's a lot more to certificates than just web pages. For example, in some situations, you'll see situations where people will use email. Now, I got to talk about this for a minute. Seeing email certificates is not nearly as common as it used to be. But let's say you're still using a Outlook where you actually have a client on your machine. You're not just going to gmail.com. Okay, I'm talking like you got an in-house company email, all right? So mike@totalsim.com. I can fire that up in Outlook. And what I can do is I can have companies like, for example, Comodo will sell me an email certificate. And what will happen is I can take that certificate, I can import it into my email client, all right? And then I can start sending encrypted emails to people. For example, let's say my buddy Shannon also set up her Outlook and also brought down an email certificate. Shannon can send me what's called a signed email. A signed email means just a regular plain email, but it's got the certificate on the bottom. And by doing that, I now have Shannon's public key. And with Shannon's public key, I can go ahead and start sending Shannon encrypted emails. Just because I get Shannon's email, Outlook puts a whole new tool set in there that you don't see if you don't do this. And on that tool set, it'll sit there and say, send encrypted. If I already have Shannon's public key, I can encrypt. Remember, public is for encrypting. I can send it there. If it's somebody else, if it's my buddy Rodney, in that case, I could just go ahead and send him an email. There's another thing that says, sign this email. So I just said, hey, Rodney, it's Mike. Listen, I want to start doing encrypted emails with you. Here is my certificate. And then if Rodney has it in his Outlook, we can all start sending encrypted email. This kind of cracks me up because right now, everybody's into securing their email. They're discovering that people like Google and Yahoo are actually reading their email and they don't like that. So they're going back to more private email servers, which is great, but they're using encrypted email systems where from email server to email server they encrypt it. Heck with that. just go ahead and grab yourself an email certificate, put it into your client. And by the way, you can put these even in Gmail clients on your web browser. You can put them in there. You can put them in Yahoo. And you're encrypting from point to point. You don't have to count on somebody else to do it. Yeah, I know. I'm the only one who does it, and I'm weird. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the other places we see certificates. Another big one is what we call code signing. Now, code signing basically means I'm going to write an executable program for, say, Windows. And in that case, Microsoft, because they want to protect us users, they're going to go to whoever's writing that software. And they're going to go, hey, man, we need you to make sure you're good, da-da-da, and then we'll give you a certificate that says you're okay. Get the idea? So it's a protection for us. Let me show you one example of that. So this is the downloads for my little system here, and there's all kinds of executables, installers that I've downloaded because I want to run them. Let's take a look at one real quick. Here's a Firefox installer. I'm going to right click on that, select Properties, and you'll notice it has a digital signatures option. So I can just click right on here, and if I want to, I can actually view the certificate. So this is the certificate associated with the Firefox installer. This is done as a protection for us. So software also has it. But it's not just software. Anybody who's ever installed a device driver in Windows will know that most systems will have machine and or computer and or hardware. They all kind of, to me, they kind of lump together certificates. So let's do this one more time, except this time we're actually going to look at a device driver. So what I've done here is I've dug through my system and I'm looking for files that end with the name CAT. These are called catalog files. Catalog files are the packages that store the device drivers and any other support files they might need. And if you've got hardware in your computer, and you do, you have lots and lots of these CAT files. So I've arbitrarily picked a CAT file, and I'm going to go to Properties, and you'll notice again I have this where it says Digital Signatures, and I can view the certificate. And look, it even tells us this certificate is intended for ensure software came from the software publisher and also protects software from alteration after publication. Now that's just a few places we see certificates, but we're not even close. For the exam, it wants you to talk about things like user certificates, which can be done in certain situations. You can set up login situations where individual users will have a certificate. That can be done, but we see things like in wireless networks. In wireless networks, you can put up a certificate onto the wireless access point. Or if you want to, you can put a certificate on the wireless access point. You can put a certificate on every little laptop and smartphone or whatever you have, and they exchange public keys. Super robust stuff. Not too commonly done in wireless because it's a pain in the rear end. But there are certificates all over the place. The greatest single challenge to certificates is, number one, make sure you're setting up the right certificate for whatever you want to do. If you're setting up a web server, you might want to go ahead and get a web certificate. If you're setting up email, get an email certificate. If you're writing code and you want to sell it to people, talk to Microsoft and get everything signed. So make sure you understand conceptually that there are different certifications. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that every different application function has a different way to take these certificates and bring them in. You might import it. There might be a feature built into it. In other episodes, we'll be playing with certificates a little bit more, and you can see this, but you always have to be patient and go, okay, I'm setting up a new web server and I want a certificate. How do I do it there? Okay, I'm setting up a new email server and I want a certificate. How do we do it there? You get the idea? Everybody's a little bit different, but certificates are everywhere.